This is a story about a debt 60 years in the making. On a crisp Seoul morning, a billionaire held his son's hand and spent his final breath not on his empire, but on a single name. "Find her," he whispered, "the little girl with the lunch pail, the one who fed me when I had nothing, and give her everything." His son, Min, was now the executor of an impossible wish. With only a faded memory from 1958 and a city of 10 million people, he had to find one woman. A woman who had no idea her childhood kindness was the cornerstone of a billionaire's life. This is the story of that search, and what happens when a promise from the past demands everything from the present. To understand the weight of that debt, you have to go back to a bitter winter in 1958. A scrawny, 12-year-old Korean boy named Park Jae-hoon stepped off a ship in San Francisco, clutching a single suitcase and a word of English: hungry. His family had lost everything in the war. They were part of a wave of immigrants who arrived with nothing but a desperate hope for solid ground. For Jae-hoon, that first American school was a landscape of terrifying noise and lonely silence. He didn't understand the jokes. He couldn't read the signs, and every lunch period was a quiet, public humiliation. He would sit alone, pretending not to have a lunch pail because he didn't have one. His family could barely afford rice. The concept of a sandwich, an apple, a bag of chips, these were artifacts from a different world. His stomach would ache through arithmetic, a constant, grinding reminder of his place. Then one Tuesday in early March, a girl sat down across from him. Her name was Annie. She was in his class. She had dark brown skin, braids tied with bright yarn, and she watched him for a moment with a quiet, unnerving focus. Without a word, she opened her lunchbox, a dented metal tin with a cartoon horse on it, and pushed half of her peanut butter sandwich across the table. Then an orange, then a handful of crackers wrapped in wax paper. He stared at the food, then at her. She just nodded, as if this was a normal transaction. When he didn't move, she picked up the sandwich half and placed it directly in his hand. "Eat," she said. It was the first English word he learned to trust. He saw her do it again later that week, sharing with another boy who had forgotten his lunch. It wasn't pity. It was a simple operational kindness, a problem she could see and a resource she had to solve it. For a boy drowning in shame, that matter-of-fact grace was a lifeline. It was the first time America felt like it could be a home and not just a cold, foreign room. He never forgot her face or the horse on that lunchbox, but within a year, his family moved across the country for work, chasing the ghost of stability. He grew up, he worked, he built. The memory of Annie and that sandwich became a private touchstone, a tiny, warm coal at the center of the ruthless ambition that would eventually build the Park Group conglomerate. He became a titan, but in his final days, wired to machines in a Seoul penthouse hospital suite, it wasn't the boardrooms or the deals that played behind his eyes. It was that cafeteria table, the orange, the wax paper, a debt of 6 decades compounding in silence. And so he called his only son, Min, the polished, 38-year-old heir to a $20 billion empire. The man who had spent his life learning to protect the fortune, not to give it away on a sentimental whim. The father's instructions were terrifyingly simple. Find Annie, find the girl with the lunch pail, and give her everything she needs for the rest of her life. Everything. The corporate lawyers in the room physically flinched. The estate plan, a labyrinth of trusts and holdings, was not designed for this. The board, already nervous about the transition, would see this as catastrophic instability. A dying man's poetry could bankrupt a dynasty. But Min looked at his father's hand, the paper-thin skin, the grip that was still fierce. He said yes. He walked out of that room carrying an impossible mission. No last name, just Annie. A city, maybe San Francisco, maybe Oakland, the memory was fuzzy. A time frame, 1958 or 59, that was it. The search for one woman in the sprawl of history, with a clock ticking not just on his father's life, but on his own credibility as the future CEO. His first move was logical. He hired the best private investigation firm on the West Coast. They scoured digitized school records from that era, a monumental task given the poor record-keeping of the time. They found hundreds of Annies. They hit wall after wall, records lost, schools demolished, neighborhoods transformed beyond recognition. Weeks passed. His father faded in and out of consciousness, each time asking the same question with his eyes. Did you find her? Meanwhile, the pressure from the park group board was a steady, cold drip. Confidential memos questioned the undue influence on the patriarch. Whispers about Minjun's emotional fitness to lead began to circulate. He was chasing a ghost with the company's future, and everyone knew it. Then a break. A junior investigator, cross-referencing old teacher assignments with student photos from a yearbook archive that had narrowly escaped a flood, found a class picture from third grade at Lincoln Elementary, spring of 1959. And there she was, a girl named Annie Davis, with bright eyes and those distinctive braids, sitting in the front row. They had a last name, Davis. It was a thread. Minjun felt a jolt of electric hope. They tracked the name. They found an Annie Davis who had lived on Telegraph Avenue, but the trail ended in the late 1960s. The family had simply vanished from public records. The lead investigator presented the grim conclusion. Mr. Park, it's likely the family moved, and it's very possible Annie Davis is no longer with us. The odds are not in our favor. Minjun stood at his office window, looking down at the sole skyline his father had built. He had a name, but it led to a void. He had promised his father to give her everything, but what if everything arrived 60 years too late? That's when his assistant, Jai-hyun, quietly entered. She held a single sheet of paper, her face pale. "Sir," she said, "we found an obituary for an Annie Davis Morris, died in 2009, in Oakland." The air left the room. The ghost was gone. The debt was unpayable. The mission had just collapsed. Minjun took the paper. He read the brief notice, survived by a daughter named Elena. He looked up. The cliffhanger of his life now had a new, fragile branch. The kindness hadn't died with Annie. It had flowed downstream. To find her was one thing, but to find what she left behind, that was a different promise entirely, and the clock was still ticking. Elena Morris, a 62-year-old retired nurse living in a small, rent-controlled apartment in East Oakland. She had no idea her mother's name was in a billionaire's will, or that a man from Seoul was staring at her address on a screen, trying to figure out how to give her a fortune she didn't know she was owed. Minjun had a new target, but this was no longer about fulfilling a simple wish. This was now a legal and ethical labyrinth. Could he transfer his father's wealth to the daughter of the intended beneficiary? The estate lawyers were clear. The letter of the will said Annie. The spirit, argued Minjun, was about the lineage of the kindness. The board saw only risk and precedent. What if every long-lost acquaintance of the patriarch's youth came forward with a story? He decided to bypass the committee. He would go to Oakland himself. He told the board he was reviewing a potential West Coast logistics investment. A thin cover, but it held. 24 hours later, he was standing outside Elena's apartment building, a modest 3-story complex with peeling paint and a chain-link fence. The contrast with his world of glass towers was absolute. For the first time, the abstract idea of everything became terrifyingly concrete. What did everything mean to a woman living on a fixed income? He knocked. The door opened to a woman with her mother's eyes, warm but cautious, her gray-streaked hair in a loose bun. She wore a faded floral dress. "Can I help you?" Minjun, in his tailored suit, suddenly felt like an alien. He introduced himself simply. "My name is Minjun Park. I believe your mother, Annie, helped my father a very long time ago." Elena's expression didn't change. "My mother helped a lot of people. That was her way. Who's your father?" "Park Jae-hoon." There was a long pause. She searched his face, then slowly stepped back. "You'd better come in." The apartment was small, tidy, filled with plants and photographs. A portrait of Annie Davis Morris, older but with the same bright gaze, sat on the mantel. Minjun told the story: the immigrant boy, the lunchbox, the 60-year debt, the deathbed request. He placed a copy of the old class photo on her coffee table, his father's face circled. Elena listened in silence, her hands folded in her lap. When he finished, she didn't react to the money. She pointed at the boy in the photo. "He was so thin," she said softly. "Mama talked about him, just once, years ago. She said there was a new boy who was always alone and always hungry. She said sharing your lunch was just what you did. She never told me his name. Then she looked directly at Minjun. But she's gone, you know that, right? She's been gone 15 years. You can't give her anything. My father wanted to repay the kindness. That kindness is now yours. It's an inheritance. Elena stood up and walked to the window. An inheritance of what? Guilt? You think money fixes a memory? My mother was a cafeteria worker and a seamstress. She died with medical debt. I paid it off. That chapter is closed. Minjun felt the mission slipping. He had anticipated gratitude, shock, maybe even avarice. He hadn't anticipated a dignified refusal. It's not guilt, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure. It's a promise. He made me promise. Well, Elena said, turning back with a sad smile. You kept it. You found me. You told me the story. That's the gift. The rest. I don't need a palace. I need a new roof on this building so my upstairs neighbor stops getting leaks. You can't give me that. But Minjun could. In that moment, the abstract billions crystallized into a specific, tangible problem, a roof. It was a start. He left her apartment with a handshake, not a check. But he also left with a new, fierce determination. He wouldn't just write a check. He would understand what everything meant to Elena Morris. He instructed his team to not just assess her finances, but her life. They discovered the building was owned by a negligent landlord. They discovered Elena volunteered 3 days a week at a community health clinic that was facing closure. They discovered her own savings were being slowly drained by rising property taxes and the soaring cost of insulin for a diabetic cousin she supported. The kindness wasn't a single act. It was a river flowing from Annie to Elena and out to her community. To repay it with a sterile bank transfer would be to misunderstand it completely. Back in Seoul, Minjun presented a new proposal to the estate executors. He wouldn't just give Elena money. He would create the Annie Davis Foundation, a charitable trust with Elena as the lifetime director, funded by a portion of his father's estate. Its mandate, food security and childhood hunger, starting with the very neighborhoods where Annie had lived. The board revolted. This was no longer a discreet payout. It was a permanent, public institution with the park name attached to a narrative they couldn't control. It's a lovely story, Minjun, said the eldest board member, but we are not a charity. We are a global corporation. This sets a dangerous precedent. The pressure reached a fever pitch when a financial blog, tipped off by a leak, ran a speculative piece. Park Group Air on Quixotic Quest, $1 billion search for ghost from grandpa's past. The article was snide, reducing his father's profound gratitude to a senile fantasy and Minjun's efforts to a PR stunt. Minjun's phone rang. It was his father's doctor. He's asking for you. He's fadding. You should come now. Time, the one resource even a billionaire couldn't buy more of, was finally running out. Minjun boarded his jet back to Seoul, the blueprint for the foundation burning a hole in his briefcase. He had to see his father. He had to tell him he'd found her, or rather, found what was left of her. He arrived at the hospital as the sun was setting. His father was awake, his eyes clouded but alert. Minjun, he whispered, did you find my Annie? Minjun took his hand. I found her daughter, Abioji. Her name is Elena. She has her mother's eyes and her heart. A tear escaped the old man's eye. A smile, fragile as tissue paper, touched his lips. Good, you give to her everything. I will, I have a plan. Minjun started to explain about the foundation, about the roof, about continuing the kindness. But his father's grip tightened slightly. His voice was a thread of sound. Not just her, the debt. It is to the kindness, not just one person, you understand. Minjun nodded, though the full weight of the words wouldn't hit him until later. His father closed his eyes, his breathing evening out into sleep or something closer to it. Standing in the silent room, Minjun finally understood. This was never just a transaction, it was a transfer of purpose. His father wasn't just passing on wealth, he was passing on a moral compass, calibrated by a peanut butter sandwich in 1959. He returned to his office, the media storm brewing, the board in open mutiny. But he felt a strange new clarity. He called his legal team. We're proceeding with the foundation, draft the papers. and prepare the initial transfer to directly settle Elena Morris's personal debts and secure her housing. Do it quietly, tonight. Then he called Elena. It was early morning in Oakland. Elena, it's Min-jun. I'm not asking permission this time. The roof on your building will be repaired next week. The clinic you volunteer at will receive a 5-year endowment by tomorrow afternoon. This is happening, but I need your help. The kindness needs a steward. Will you help me build something in your mother's name? There was a long silence on the line. He could hear her breathing. Finally, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. You're a stubborn man, Min-jun Park, just like your father must have been. She paused. Tell me what you have in mind. For the next hour, they talked not as billionaire and retiree, but as two people connected by a 60-year-old thread of grace. They designed the foundation's first initiative, a school lunch program in Oakland that wouldn't just feed children, but would also teach them the history of local kindness, starting with a story about a little girl named Annie. Min-jun hung up, exhausted but hopeful. He had a partner, he had a plan, he had fulfilled his father's literal request. That's when his assistant, Jae-hyun, rushed in, her face ashen. Sir, the blog, they've found more. They've published another article. She turned her tablet toward him. The headline was a sledgehammer. The forgotten heirs. Did dying billionaire overlook his own family to favor a stranger? The article named names. It revealed that Min-jun's own cousins, the children of his father's estranged brother, had been largely cut out of the will, with their inheritances tied to strict, performance-based trusts. It contrasted this with the lavish, no-strings-attached gift to a random American woman. It quoted an anonymous family member calling Min-jun's quest a betrayal of blood. The board now had a weapon. The private family drama was now public fuel for a corporate coup. Min-jun's credibility wasn't just questioned, it was being framed as a profound disloyalty. The act of fulfilling a promise was being twisted into an act of stealing from his own family. He stared at the headline. The mission had just exploded. The debt from the past wasn't just about money anymore. It was about to tear his present and his future apart. The anonymous source was his cousin, Yi-won, the brother he'd grown up with, played with, who now saw Min-jun's quest not as a fulfillment of duty, but as the theft of his own children's future. The private family fracture was now a public chasm, and Yi-won was holding a blowtorch. He called Min-jun directly, his voice cold with a fury decades in the making. You give millions to a stranger's memory, while my son gets a trust fund that pays out only if he gets a master's degree in business. What is that? Our uncle's final insult, administered by you. Min-jun tried to explain about their father's specific wish, about the difference between an inheritance and a moral debt. Yi-won cut him off. It's all money, Min-jun, and you're choosing a ghost over family. The board agrees with me. They see it now. You're compromised. He was right. The board scheduled an emergency vote of no confidence in Min-jun's leadership for the end of the week. The corporate machinery his father built was now turning against his father's final wish. The foundation paperwork, so close to being signed, was frozen by legal injunction filed by Yi-won's lawyers, claiming undue influence and estate mismanagement. Min-jun was trapped. To save the foundation, he had to win a board battle. To win the board battle, he might have to abandon the foundation. His father, in his final act, had handed him a puzzle with no solution that wouldn't break something. Then Elena called. Her voice was quiet but steady. The reporters are here, at my door. They're asking if I'm a gold digger, if I manipulated a dying man. She paused. They have pictures of you leaving my apartment. A new, more visceral fear seized Min-jun. He had dragged her into the storm. Elena, I am so sorry. I'll get security there immediately. Don't answer the door. It's not me I'm worried about, she said. It's the clinic. They're there too, asking questions, scaring the patients. This kindness you want to honor, it's turning into a weapon. Maybe we should stop. No, Min-jun said, more forcefully than he intended. We don't stop. This is exactly what they want. They want it to be too messy, too complicated, so we give up and the money stays where it's always been. I won't let that happen. But he was running out of moves. His legal team advised a brutal compromise, settle with Yi-won. increase his cousin's trust payouts significantly to buy their silence, and drop the injunction. Use corporate funds, not the estate. It would be a betrayal of his father's precise intentions, a dilution of the gift to Alina, but it might save the foundation and his position. It felt like poison. He went to the hospital, needing his father's guidance, knowing he could not get it. The old man was mostly unconscious now, breathing with the help of a machine. Minjun sat beside him, holding his limp hand, and spoke to the silence. "Abioji, it's a war, and I don't know how to fight it without becoming the thing they accuse me of being." His father did not stir. That night Minjun made a decision. He would not settle, he would fight. But to fight Yiwan and the board, he needed stronger ground. He needed to prove that this wasn't a sentimental whim, but a strategically sound, even necessary, act of legacy building. He called his head of corporate strategy. "I need every piece of data, every study on the social impact of corporate philanthropy, on brand value tied to authentic storytelling, on the long-term economic benefits of solving local issues like hunger. Turn it into a presentation, not for the board, for the world." He was going to take the story public, on his own terms. If they wanted a media war, he would give them a manifesto. While his team scrambled, a second shock arrived. A private investigator, still digging into Annie Davis's past on a separate track, sent a new file. It wasn't about Annie. It was about her husband, Elena's father. A man named David Morris had served in the Korean War. He had been part of a unit that provided engineering support near Busan in 1952. The same region, the same time, that Minjun's father's family had fled through as refugees. There was no direct connection, no evidence they had met, but the symmetry was haunting. A black American soldier helping to rebuild a war-torn Korea. Years later, his wife would feed a starving Korean refugee boy in America. The circle of kindness and survival across oceans and generations was far wider, far deeper than anyone had imagined. Minjun stared at the documents. This changed everything. This wasn't just a story about a lunch. It was a story about two intertwined histories, two families unknowingly passing a thread of humanity back and forth across the world. It was the perfect foundation narrative, bigger than a single debt. It was unassailable. He called Alina back. "Did you know about your father in Korea?" She was quiet for a long time. "I knew he served. He never talked about it. He said it was a hard time, but that the people were resilient." Her voice broke. "He would have loved this. He really would have." "We're going to tell that story," Minjun said. "All of it." The day of the board vote arrived. Minjun walked into the boardroom not with lawyers, but with a presentation screen. Before the vote could be called, he stood. "You are here to vote on whether I am fit to lead this company my father built. Before you do, I ask you to understand what he was building toward at the end. Not more wealth, a legacy." He showed them the picture of the skinny boy. He showed them the picture of Annie. He showed them the document about David Morris. He showed them the financial modeling for the Annie Davis Foundation, not as a cost, but as a long-term strategic investment in social capital and brand integrity that would resonate for decades in every market they operated in. He showed them the headlines of the positive coverage that was already starting to trickle out from ethical news outlets who had picked up the fuller story. "My father's last lesson," Minjun concluded, his voice echoing in the silent room, "was that the greatest asset this company has is not its portfolio, but its soul. This foundation is that soul made tangible. Voting against this is not a vote against me. It is a vote to declare that Park Group has no memory and no heart." He sat down. The room was utterly still. Then, one by one, the older members, the ones who had actually known his father in the early days, began to nod. The vote proceeded. It was not unanimous, but it was enough. The motion of no confidence failed. Minjun had won the board, but Yiwan's legal injunction still held. The foundation was still frozen, and as he left the boardroom, his phone buzzed. It was the hospital. His father had taken a turn. He was not expected to last the night. Minjun's victory turned to ash in his mouth. He rushed to the hospital. His father was awake, impossibly, eyes clear. He took Minjun's hand. "You fought," he whispered. "Yes, Abioji." Good, now finish it for her, for both of them. His father's eyes closed. The monitor let out a long, steady tone. Park Jae-hoon was gone. The debt was now entirely Min Jun's to settle. The man who had incurred it could no longer guide its repayment. Min Jun was alone with the promise. He spent the next day in a blur of funeral arrangements and corporate formalities, the new chairman of the Park Group. The weight was colossal, and waiting on his desk was a final, devastating piece of paper. Yi-won's lawyers, undeterred by the board's vote, had filed a new, broader lawsuit. They were now contesting the entire will, claiming Min Jun had exercised coercive influence over a vulnerable dying man. They named the Annie Davis Foundation as primary evidence. The entire estate, the very tool Min Jun needed to fulfill his promise, was now locked in probate court. It could take years to untangle, years Elena didn't have, years the clinic didn't have. The kindness, it seemed, would be buried not by refusal, but by legal procedure. Min Jun stood in his new, empty office, the city lights twinkling below. He had never felt more powerful or more powerless. He had won the company, but lost the path to fulfilling the vow that had started it all. The clock hadn't stopped with his father's death. It had just started ticking louder. He needed a move that no lawyer could block, a move that didn't require a single one from the contested estate. He picked up his phone. He had one last card to play, and it was the biggest risk of his life. Min Jun's final card was his own name, not as the heir, but as the man. He walked into the headquarters of Korea's largest broadcast network and asked for 5 minutes of live primetime television. He was going to tell the whole story, and in doing so, bet his entire inheritance on the court of public opinion. His advisors begged him not to. It was unprecedented. It was reckless. A corporate chairman did not air family and legal disputes on national TV, but Min Jun was done playing by the rulebook that was designed to protect the money, not the mission. If the estate is frozen, he told them, then I will use my voice. It's the one asset they can't tie up in court. The network, sensing a historic ratings moment, agreed. 2 nights later, Min Jun Park sat in a stark studio, a single microphone in front of him, no teleprompter, no prepared statement. At 9 p.m., he looked directly into the camera and began to speak. He didn't talk about market share or corporate strategy. He talked about a hungry boy. He talked about a little girl with a lunchbox. He held up the faded class photo. He told the nation about Annie Davis, about her husband David, who served in their country during the war, and about their daughter Elena, a retired nurse who was now being called a gold digger for accepting a thank you that hadn't even arrived. My father's last wish, Min Jun said, his voice steady but raw, was to repay a kindness that taught him that America, that the world could be a place of compassion. That debt does not die with the debtor. It passes to the next generation, my generation. So tonight I'm making a public pledge. The Annie Davis Foundation will be established. If the contested estate cannot fund it, I will fund it myself, with every personal share and asset I own, until the courts decide otherwise. Then he addressed his cousin directly, speaking to the camera as if to a person in the room. Yi-won, this was never about taking from our family. It was about adding to our family's story. Our father built an empire from nothing. But what is an empire for, if not to do something that outlasts the balance sheet? I am inviting you to help me build this, to be a part of this legacy, not an opponent of it. He finished with a simple line: kindness is not a liability, it is the original investment. The broadcast ended. For 60 seconds, there was silence across the country. Then the internet erupted. The hashtag #LunchboxDebt began trending globally. The narrative flipped overnight. Yi-won and the lawyers were no longer framed as protectors of the estate, but as obstructors of a beautiful, cross-cultural promise. Editorials praised Min Jun's moral courage. Financial analysts, surprisingly, noted the immense brand equity being generated by the authenticity of the story. The pressure became unbearable for the opposition. 3 days after the broadcast, Min Jun received a call. It was Yi-won. "Meet me," he said, "at our grandfather's old house in Insadong." They met in the small hanok their father and uncle had grown up in, now preserved as a family museum. Yi-won looked exhausted. "You shamed me on national television," he said, but the fire was gone from his voice. "I stated a truth," Min Jun replied. This didn't have to be a war. Yi-Wan looked around at the modest rooms. He never loved us like he loved you, you know. We were the poor relation. The trusts he set up for my children, they felt like a test, a punishment for not being you. Minjun understood then that this was never about the money. It was about a lifetime of perceived slights, now focused on this one dramatic act. The trusts were his way of making sure they earned it like he did. But you're right, he could have been kinder. I am trying to be kinder. Let me fix this. Join the foundation board. Help me direct it. Let your children see you build something, not just defend something. It was a genuine offer. Yi-Wan studied his cousin's face, looking for the trick. He saw none. He gave a single, slow nod. I will drop the lawsuit on one condition. The Foundation's first project in Korea is named for our uncle, my father. Done, Minjun said. With the lawsuit withdrawn, the estate was unfrozen. The machinery of the Park Group could now officially enact Park Jae-hoon's final wishes, but the public pledge had changed everything. Minjun insisted on following through with his personal contribution as well, creating a hybrid funding structure, a major endowment from the estate, and a significant personal gift from the new chairman to seed the first projects. 6 weeks later, Minjun flew back to Oakland. This time, he did not go alone. Yi-Wan came with him. They stood with Alina Morris on the steps of the newly renovated community clinic, now renamed the Annie Davis Community Health Center. The roof on her apartment building had been replaced. The lunch program, Annie's Table, was launching in 10 schools. At a small ceremony, Alina spoke. She looked out at the crowd of neighbors, children, and reporters. My mother shared her lunch because it was the right thing to do. She expected nothing back. That's why it mattered. This, she said, gesturing to the clinic, is not a repayment. It's a continuation. The lunch she shared fed a boy for a day, but the lesson she taught is about to feed generations. That was her gift. And now it's ours to pass on. Minjun then handed her a single, framed document. It was the Foundation Charter, listing Alina as its lifetime director. She would oversee a global fund with an initial endowment of $100 million, but the real surprise came next. Alina turned to Minjun and Yi-Wan. I have something for you both. She presented them with a small, dented metal box. Inside was Annie Davis's lunchbox, the one with the cartoon horse, and tucked inside was a folded piece of notebook paper, brittle with age. It was a diary entry from 1959, written in a young girl's careful cursive. Alina read it aloud. Today I shared my lunch with the new boy from Korea. He was so quiet. He ate the sandwich so fast. I hope he's not hungry tomorrow. Mama says we are all God's children and we have to look out for each other. I will save an apple for him, just in case. Minjun felt the breath catch in his throat. His father had been remembered. The act had been recorded. The kindness had been conscious and intentional and remembered. The circle was complete. The final surprising detail, however, came from the bottom of the box. Under the diary entry was a black and white photograph of a group of American soldiers and Korean children. On the back, in handwriting they now recognized as Annie's, was a caption, David's picture from Korea. He said these children reminded him why he was there. And there, in the corner of the photo, was a young boy holding a soldier's hand. The boy's face was blurred, but the shape of his ears, the set of his shoulders, it was unmistakably a young Park Jae-hoon. The two families had been in the same place, at the same time, a decade before the lunchroom, connected by a different act of kindness. David Morris had, in all likelihood, helped a lost refugee child find his way. The threads of fate were not just intertwined, they were braided. Minjun and Yi-Wan returned to Seoul with a new understanding. They had not just settled a debt, they had uncovered a shared history that rewrote their own. The Park Group's annual report that year featured not just financial figures, but the story of the two families. The Annie Davis Foundation became a core part of the corporate identity, attracting top talent and unparalleled customer loyalty. And in a quiet corner of the Foundation's Seoul office, a display case holds 3 items: a faded peanut butter sandwich wrapper, a pair of child's shoes from the 1950s, and a dented lunchbox with a cartoon horse. A plaque beneath it reads, "The smallest act of kindness is the first building block of an empire. Build wisely." The debt was paid, the promise was kept, But the lesson, as Minjun now knew, was that a true debt of kindness is never fully repaid. It is only ever passed forward, gaining value with every hand it touches. His father's last request was not an end, it was a beginning. So what is the true currency of a life well lived? This story suggests it is not wealth accumulated, but kindness compounded, interest paid across decades in the most unexpected of ways. Park Jae-hoon carried the memory of a peanut butter sandwich through every boardroom, every deal, every sleepless night of building an empire. That memory wasn't a distraction from his ambition, it was the foundation of it. It was the proof that humanity existed, that connection was possible even in the coldest of circumstances. And in his final moments, he understood that the only fitting use for the empire was to honor the act that made him believe in a better world in the first place. Minjun's journey was one of translation. He had to translate a dying man's emotional debt into legal structures, corporate strategy, and finally, into a public promise. He risked his inheritance, his reputation, and his family bonds to fulfill it. In doing so, he didn't just give away wealth, he transformed it. He turned money into meaning. And Elena, the steward of the kindness, received the gift not as a windfall, but as a responsibility. She ensured it would flow outward, beyond herself, to feed and heal a community. The lunchbox had come full circle, from feeding one child to nurturing thousands. This is more than a heartwarming tale, it's a blueprint. It asks us an uncomfortable, beautiful question: what quiet act of grace have we forgotten or received? We may not have billions to give, but we all have a lunchbox of some kind. Our time, our attention, a word of encouragement, a moment of patience. These are the seeds of future forests we will never sit under. Annie Davis had no idea her simple act would one day fund health clinics and school lunches. She just saw a boy who was hungry. That is the profound power of ordinary decency. It operates on a timeline far longer than our own. The story of the lunchbox debt reminds us that our lives are not isolated columns in a ledger. They are threads in a vast, interconnected tapestry. A thread tugged in a 1950s cafeteria can pull on a boardroom in 21st century Seoul and a clinic in Oakland. We are all always repaying old kindnesses and issuing new ones, whether we know it or not. So today, think of your Annie, think of your Jae-hoon, who fed you when you were hungry in whatever form that hunger took, and who might be hungry near you now. You don't need an empire to start the repayment. You just need to remember and then to act. This story was made with the hope that it would find you exactly when you needed it. If it moved you, if it reminded you of someone, tell us in the comments below. Share your story of a kindness that changed your life. And if you believe in the power of stories that connect us across time and distance, help us grow this community. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more documentaries that explore the hidden architecture of the human heart. Thank you for watching. Remember to be kind. You never know how far your lunchbox will